Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It is Monday, October 25th, 2010, and we're sure glad you've joined us. And Jim Burke is here. Jim, thanks for coming.
Very nice to be here.
Well, it's really nice to have you here. This is a hugely selfish activity for me because I'm dying to pick your brain about English companion names. So I'm looking forward a lot to the conversation. The Future of Education series is sponsored by my employer Illuminate, now Blackboard Collaborate, since they were acquired by Blackboard a couple of months ago. The project I work on is called Learn Central. It's a social network for educators with Illuminate baked in. We hope you'll come and use it. It is free, and hopefully it's helpful. This month's Future Education sessions are sponsored in part by Redo from Microsoft. They're contributing to my book fund, and I really appreciate it. So thanks to Microsoft, Bing, and Redo. The Global Education Conference, a free 5-day event coming up in November. This is really going to be a blast if I can survive till then. It looks like we'll have over 350 sessions from all over the world about globally connecting students and teachers. It is free. We're still accepting proposals. The event is about participation, so if you're interested in presenting, please do go to globaleducationconference.com. If you're interested in watching, you'll have lots to watch during that week. Coming up on the Future of Education tomorrow, Diane Ravitch talks about her book, The Death and Life of the Great American School System. Should be really fun to have her on the show. Been looking forward to that. Clarence Fisher on Thursday will also be a great show. Next week, Vicki Abellis will talk about her movie Race to Nowhere, which isn't getting nearly the publicity as Waiting for Superman, but I think is just as important. Stephen Farr talks about Teach for America. Lots more coming up. You'll see we've got the week of Global EdCon in there, and lots of fun. Hopefully something you care about in the future. If you've missed a show, they're all recorded. They are at futureofeducation.com, and you can listen to the recordings. I think it's stunning to think about how many we've done and what great wisdom is there. They are available in an MP3 podcast form or full Illuminate recordings, so hopefully you'll find something there as well that will be of value. If this is your first time in Illuminate, it is a participative environment, so we hope that you'll use the tools here to communicate and collaborate. It can be a little bit overwhelming if you haven't been in here before. I recommend that you go first up to View in the menu, View Layouts, and click on the Wide Layout. It makes it a little bit easier to see the chat. You'll see at the bottom of the participant window you have ways to click on the smiley face or clap a hand or give a confused look or even a thumbs down. We rarely get those. Would anticipate getting them from me rather than for Jim tonight. If you want to raise your hand to ask a question, you do so by clicking the larger icon, the hand with the green up arrow. That lets us know you want to take the mic. But before you do that, make sure you've gone up to Tools Audio and checked your setup, the audio setup wizard, to make sure your microphone is working. You'll also have a chance to put questions in the chat. The chat is really a fun area. It's usually a place where we gather lots of good resources and links. It does help to keep on topic in that chat because Jim will be seeing that as well, and it can be distracting if it's not related to the session tonight. Do know that even though there's a drop-down box that allows you to send a private message in the chat, Jim and I as moderators do see all of those messages. So we're going to give you your first chance to participate now. To the left of the map, you should see a wand with a red star at the end. If you click on that and then click on the map, it'll let us know where you're participating from. You can also shout out in the chat if you're somewhere interesting where the temperature is different or the weather is weird. It's always fun to hear. All of the giants, of course. And wherever you're participating from, or if you're listening to the recording, we are sure glad to have you with us. So Jim, again, I feel I need to apologize a little because this is a session that I really expect to be to my great benefit. But you are the creator of English Companion Ning, a terrific Ning network. I want to talk about that tonight. But I thought before we did so, it would be really helpful to have you give a little bit of an outline of your own personal career, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of the things you're passionate outside of social networking.
Sure. Well, I actually came to teaching English through special ed, of all things. I got a degree in psychology. One of the big dark secrets that we can all enjoy this evening is the fact that I don't actually have a degree in English, which somehow seems to make me eminently qualified to teach it. And I went into the Peace Corps and taught special ed over there in North Africa. And then after hanging out over there for a couple of years, I came back and was really ready to start teaching something different. And so I went through the credential program at San Francisco State and started teaching English in I started my student teaching the week Salman Rushdie went into hiding. So I always kind of had a special bond with Salman Rushdie for a while. So I've been teaching since 1989 out here in the Bay Area in California, at Castro Valley first for a couple of years, where I taught with a wonderful department, and then after 3 years, after the bridge that I had to cross broke from the Loma Prieta earthquake, I thought it would be better to get home, closer to home in San Francisco. So I transferred to a school in Burlingame, which is right by the San Francisco airport, and I have been there ever since. And it's interesting, when you look at how our life passes in unexpected ways, because when I was 14, and I was a very poor student in school, but I was one of the better tennis players in the state. And ironically, I used to come down and play the national hardcourt championships at Burlingame. And my mother parked the car right outside of what now is my classroom. And it's just one of those strange things that, as you told me that I was going to grow up and become an English teacher and spend my adult life in this high school as an English teacher, and that I would write books, I think nothing in the world would have seemed more absurd. So I think it's interesting how our life plays out in these different ways.
Jim, I had really good intentions of spending a couple of hours with your Big Idea book today, and as luck would have it, something came up that precluded me from doing so. But I got enough into it to have felt like I had a great appreciation for you as a teacher. Do you want to talk about the things that you really care about in terms of just teaching?
Yeah, I think that right now in particular, I think that what I'm particularly passionate about in light of a lot of the developments in education has to do with organizing our class around meaningful questions. And I think we're at this time, and I certainly see this in my own district, where some people, often administrators, want to kind of be guided by fear and scores and things like that. And so they tend to want to make decisions that sort of threaten the reason, in many respects, for so much of what brought us into English, which are the conversations and the ideas that go along with the literature, and kind of reduce it down to the skills. And so the book, What's the Big Idea? Is, fundamental to that book is the idea of taking all the skills and folding those into kind of meaningful conversations. I love Arthur Appleby's book, Curriculum as Conversation, and examining those, teaching those skills within the context of meaningful conversations about the books that the kids are reading. And that really, I think, has captured a great deal of my own experience as a teacher, but I think it also is perhaps the kind of thing that I would have responded to well as a student as well.
Since the interview series is called The Future of Education, if you were, if you were being asked to look at sort of policy directions related to your core beliefs as an educator around critical questions and conversations, are there implications for large educational policy, and sort of how do you react to the kinds of what would you like to see happening now in education rather than what you feel is happening?
Well, one thing is maybe kind of a basic idea, but it never seems to kind of get onto the table. Is what I notice, whether it's with the core standards or whether it's with, big, all-day meetings in my district about these issues, is that everybody really focuses a lot on the what. They want to have big conversations about what parts of grammar or which books we should teach or this or that or the other, and that's all important, but it never really results in the kind of change of how we teach things. And so, in a sense, we end up kind of being at the same place in so much of this. And so when you look at the direction that a lot of the conversation is going about teaching, I think you have to ask yourself, is it going in the direction that will not only engage minds, but develop skills that we need? I see my good friend Carol Jago just joined in, and one of the sayings that Carol has that I've always really loved is that we have to help students make a living as well as make a life, and I think that is a very important part of our tradition. But I don't see it always very effectively represented at the table. It's very nicely represented if Carol's at the table as the president of NCTE and a lot of the other stuff that she does. But otherwise, I often feel like the people that are in danger of making the decisions are more driven by, the safe results of test scores that would somehow imply that we're making a bigger difference. And just as a quick follow-up, I think the role of conversations taking place between classes and between students across time through things even like Illuminate. I find myself looking for more and more ways to integrate online conversations in one form or another into my classes. And, the more you see the way kids can engage at that and sometimes have more time to process things, the more value you realize there is for that kind of a conversation.
So we've had some pretty progressive or, a diversity of views of people in coming to Future of Education for the interview series. One of the themes that seems to have evolved a little is that the kind of measuring that's taking place, or the interest in depending on that measuring, almost feels like it's a way of maintaining control. Is there a big story here? I mean, are we actually looking at a larger story about the educational institutions losing control of the learning environment?
Well, I'll answer it one way that maybe is a different way than you'd expect. I've got one idea in my mind of somewhat of a dystopian novel, and it amounts to all the kids waking up one day and finding a package on their door, and in the package is essentially a government issued laptop, and that you would have essentially sort of the nation's English teacher or the nation's ninth grade English teacher, and when you start thinking about the national conversation and the ways in which people want to control education, sometimes I think that the ways in which people want to try to control it may well hasten some of the exodus of some people from the system. As BYU and a wider range of institutions come online, and more and more controls, more and more options are available for students to get course credit outside of schools. So this idea of online education, I do not think is a replacement for being in the classroom with real life people. I mean, my classroom this morning was great and never could have taken place online. But I guess I worry sometimes about the decisions in those efforts to exert control in the name of trying to improve education, kind of driving people out of the market, because what you generally see is sort of a growing demand for people to be able to get their experiences, whether they're education or anything else, in whatever form and medium that they want. It's a TiVo world. People want to be able to kind of do things when they want to do them.
It's been really interesting to kind of play with these different ideas, and I think that's been a theme that's been around through the discussions, is this whole idea of the more tightly you try and control, maybe the more you get the opposite of what you're looking for. I'm also kind of curious as to the degree to which we've talked in the sessions here about sort of our stories of education and the desire that we have now to kind of rebuild a story that really makes sense for teaching and learning. So I'd like to shift toward the social networking piece because I'm curious as to how that plays in here. And because the network you have to be a member of the network to actually move around inside of it, I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop where I'm signed in so people can actually see the English Companion Ning.
Yeah.
And would you just tell us a little bit about how the network started and what got you to, I'm going to pull up the members page here. I think you're at 22,000 members now.
Yeah. Well, it's actually a really nice time to talk about it because we're coming up on I think it's December 8th would be the 2-year anniversary, and it was at NCTE, almost 2 years ago. NCTE is coming up. It was at NCTE that I noticed how few new young English teachers were attending, and how few of those who even attended were members of NCTE, were reading the journals, and I began to realize the extent to which NCTE as an organization and the journals and the relationships from the conferences and whatnot had fundamentally shaped me. And the idea that a lot of the young teachers would simply be excluding themselves from that conversation, whether it's because of the cost of attending or joining or whatever, was really troubling to me. And so the original idea, frankly, was to create something that was just for new and younger teachers. And so I went home from NCTE, and I was quite literally grading papers after I got back, and I thought, I just want to try to figure out something to do for these young teachers. And I thought, and I'd never heard of the Ning until Kylie Beers set up a Ning for NCTE that year. And so I thought, that Ning thing, maybe I could do that, because that was pretty easy to create, and at that time it was free. And I literally, in about 5-10 minutes, because it's all just sort of drag and drop, I went on to Ning, created an account, set up English Companion Ning, and the idea was to create a space for new teachers. And then I made a very crucial decision, I think, early on, which was to send to people like Carol Jago, who kind of come along with their own network as a writing project director or a literature project director, and I said, hey, I set up this site, let people know about it. And then I went back to grading papers, and when I got home from work the next day, there were 100 people that had already joined. And the first day I realized, going back to kind of that theme of control, that you can't tell the internet what it wants to do or what it wants to be. I wanted it to be for new teachers, and here's a 30-year librarian from New Zealand wanting to join, and so right away I kind of find myself thinking like, well, why wouldn't I want a librarian from New Zealand? And so in a way that I had never really had cause to appreciate, I very quickly became aware of what the World Wide Web means. So, so that was kind of the genesis.
Paul's calling out your quote, we can't tell the web what we want it to be. I think for those of us who've participated in the building of these kind of social tools in some area, you do feel like the pyramid gets inverted, and very much you're starting with the personal and allowing people to determine where the network goes rather than kind of mandating. And I'm often approached by people who have very strong ideas about something they want to see happen in their institution, and that's sometimes the hardest message to convey.
It is. I'm reminded a little bit of a quote from Faulkner, who when he was asked about his stories, he said, whether he planned them, he said he always had ideas, but then once the story got going, he felt like he was just a reporter chasing after the characters with a notepad to write down what they did. And I think that's often the way creating websites like the Ning go as well. So it very quickly, within a week, took off and just began to include all sorts of other people, at which point I think I kind of quickly began to realize that it was going to do something that I hadn't necessarily intended, and then you kind of find yourself in conversation with others in trying to understand what they want. And I spent a great deal of time on that tagline where English teachers go to help each other. I spent a lot of time on that, trying to capture kind of the core values of it, and I think that has proved to be a really definitive action. When you try to figure out what your core values are. I listened recently to the book Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh, the guy that founded Zappos Shoe Company, and he was talking about that concept of core values and the extent to which you can figure out kind of who you are and what you're trying to be, and really stay true to that. And I think that the members of the Ning have just done a remarkable job of really honoring that value of just coming there to help each other.
So there's a note in here from Jeanette about your guidance of the Ning, and I think in one interview you mentioned specifically sort of the tone or tenor of the network. And again, those of us who've created large Ning networks have experienced this. Although I couldn't tell from the interview you did with Ning whether or not you went through the same thing I did, but I went through several months at Classroom 2.0 of having to make specific private comments to people to encourage them to be more welcoming to beginners and more thoughtful. Did you experience that at all? I mean, I felt like there was a group of people who came in who really brought with them the sort of the acerbic nature of blogging, and I had to help tone that down.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I have had, I would say in nearly 2 years, and if somebody out there, has a different take on it than I do, then chime in. But we've relatively gone flame free. There are a few people whose opinions are more, shall we say, strong than others. But I don't think people tend to mistake their passions for some sort of fierce judgment. And I think, as Carol is saying there, Carol Jago is saying the teachers are more naturally civil and nurturing. I think, particularly because our network is devoted to English teachers, I think the nature of the way we work with people and with in the classroom, it's our nature to facilitate discussions.
So one of the early the networks that were pre-Ning, one of the ways in which they helped to make people feel like the networks were of value were they provided an ability to be anonymous. So if you were working in a school, you could actually ask questions about how to deal with a difficult situation, either with a student or with an administrator, another teacher, and not have to worry about compromising yourself by being publicly visible as you ask that question. Ning pretty much doesn't allow that. So by requiring that someone be a member to see the site, is that in part to address that, or do you think that those days are just gone where you can be anonymous? And have we lost something because of that?
I think people can be as anonymous as they want on there. I mean, I don't know. Paul Hankins, real name could be, Barbara for all I know. What's the saying on the internet? Nobody knows you're a dog. So I think that there are people on there like Clicks, who has a name like that, CLIX, and she's just a wonderful member of our community, but I have no idea what her name is. A few people have screen names that look like regular names, and then we've had kind of backroom conversations, and they'll tell me that their real name is Elaine or something like that. And I think people in part know the level of risks that are involved with their own communities. So there have been a few situations where people have gotten in trouble that for saying things online, and I think that is something that we're all kind of learning to realize is the extent to which, even if it seems like a fairly sheltered space, somebody can sign up with whatever name they want. I'm not, checking their IDs. The main reason why people have to join actually is just for the sheer efficiency of cutting down on the spam. We found that by requiring that we can block a lot of the spam up front as people are trying to get in, and that saves us a lot of time. So that was really the main reason for doing that.
So you and I could probably spend hours talking about managing spam membership joins. You solved that by creating a group of people to help you approve membership. Is that correct?
It is. That was a really there's a wonderful spirit of people on there in terms of their willingness to help. There has evolved, which we can talk more about if you'd like. But there's kind of a wonderful group of people that have evolved into the professional development wing of the outfit, and that was a completely grassroots effort. I know somebody earlier on was making some comment about the extent to which I had kind of given it over to people to run, and that I guess Jeanette was talking about my guidance and letting people work it together. I mean, at the end of the day, I go to work every day as a teacher, and I come home with papers, and I'm surrounded by them right now, and I try to write these books, and if aside from the people that are helping to approve things, and a few other little odd jobs here and there in the PD group, it's kind of a one-man shop, and if it required anything more, then I really couldn't keep doing it. So it's, I think in a way, the conditions of my own constraints have forced us all to really work together to just kind of make this thing, very, very hands-off, and for the most part, it really works very well. I do not have a lot of time spent, going into back rooms and talking to people about their attitude and their tone or things like that.
That's interesting. Classroom 2.0 started in February of 2007, so I don't know if it's the difference in the timing or just maybe a different audience. But Classroom 2.0 drew largely from an early core group of edu-bloggers who were actively blogging, and there was a sort of competitive, oftentimes almost shouting aspect to that conversation, and I think maybe that made it unique, bringing it into the social networking. I felt like social networking actually really helped make the discussion more thoughtful. So Classroom 2.0, English companioning, is there a much broader opportunity here? I mean, are we very much still at the beginning of this idea of using social networking for professional development? And if you were going to forecast over the next 5 years, what do you think are the possibilities that aren't being fully utilized right now, and where could this go?
Well, I think it's a big the big shift that I think we don't know what it'll be, but that really we're on the cusp of, is simply an entire generation that will grow up completely immersed in and comfortable with this. I mean, I had to learn about it. I've been online, for a long time now at this point, but I'm still not, I wasn't born into it. And so now you have kids who are coming of age in an era, the Gen Ys, the millennials, the net Jenners, as Don Tapscott calls them, and they just think in those media. I've got my AP seniors right now. I told them that they had to set up discussion groups online for this work they're doing with Hamlet. And in the past, I would have said everybody, has to use, whatever, Google Groups or something like that. And now, I'll put a list up on the board, and sometimes I'll put some other things up there like Google Wave and say, I really don't know how to use this, but, if you want to use this as an occasion to learn it, play with it, that's fine. And the other day I went around the room and I said, so what are you using? And, there were a couple of groups that were using Google Docs, there were a couple of groups that were using Google Groups, there were a couple of groups that were using Facebook, I think even a few other things. And so this is a group that at this point at 17, 18 years old is just so fluent in those media that I think that will be as far as use of it and familiarity with it, I think that'll be it'll just be part of their culture. It goes back in part to the creation of the Ning in the first place, though, because what I found was that a lot of these new teachers, let's say 25 and under, even 30 and under, and I don't say this critically, they don't tend to go straight to Heinemann or Corwin or whatever and see what books are out there on a subject. They tend to just go online and type in Google graphic organizers and see what comes up for graphic organizers, and then kind of just cast about on the web. So the other thing was the idea of creating a space that was more integrated as a learning environment where people could kind of develop a relationship and invest in it and kind of make that space their, I guess you kind of think of it as their little professional cloud where they could, come and harvest materials, and if they can't find things, then ask people. But the randomness, and I see Carol's comment there, it's a little discouraging as a writer when, your 25-year-old colleague sends you a link and they say, hey, Jim, I found this great website on graphic organizers. Have you ever seen this? And you think, no, but, if people found that, who would ever feel the need to buy my books? So it's a translation.
So what are I'm going to have you take us through the site and kind of talk about the ways in which you've set it up. But what have been the restrictions of Ning that you wish would be different, or what are the capabilities you wish were there that aren't?
I think we're still like the interactivity. I mean, ideally, if you kind of thought of it as a complete portal. When we did the professional development last summer, Illuminate was wonderfully supportive in helping us set that up and sponsoring it and giving us space for free and everything. I think ideally, the extent to which you can design experiences that keep people in the site, not to do that to control them, but just, every time you add another link and another layer, I think that expands the possibilities for misconnections and things like that. So I think trying to integrate the space so that we can work more interactively in some ways in there. Can you scroll? I don't think can I scroll down that on Steve? I've got you to. I think the book club has been a really interesting feature. That's, I think, probably the one area in which I more actively exercise my connections to authors by being able to invite them in. And I knew that we began to get something going when, after about our second book group, Smokey Daniels and Steph Harvey said, we were hoping that you'd pick our book for the book group. And I thought, wow, that's a big deal when I got those people coming. Donald Miller just joined. Hi, Donald. And Carol Jago is on there, and Maya Wilson, who's in here with us, was actually the first book group, and I think it was a great example of what makes a good book group, because it was on rethinking rubrics, and you might think like, oh wow, big hot discussion about rubrics, but I think it showed right off the bat what makes for good interactive discussion. And that is that there kind of have to be ideas that people want to contend with. So Kelly Gallagher's book Read Aside was really successful, and then Carol Jago last summer took us in a really interesting new direction. She wanted to run an online book discussion about just a novel instead of a professional book, and Carol made it interactive by setting up a poll or a survey. So Carol came up with the titles that she wanted people to be able to choose from, and then she, let the group choose what book they wanted to read. And so I think, beginning to integrate those tools in ways that make it more interactive is useful.
So from my perspective, I really wish there was a better profiling capability, sort of search and profiling, so people could find each other based on geography or special interests. And I wish there were a better calendar feature. and I wish there was a better way to upload materials. Do you ever feel the same? Do those ever occur to you as being areas where you wish there was better capability?
Yeah, I mean, I solved the. If you go up under Notes and Events, you can see the EC-Ning events calendar. If you click on that, does that under Notes and Events, you scroll down there to right there. So what I did is, it's not a perfect solution, but you can embed the Google Calendar within there. So that at least gives us all a way of showing kind of what's going on. It shows you which book groups are happening and things like that. And I think that becomes a useful way to, if nothing else for me, to be able to keep track of what we've got going on, because the book clubs are beginning to, be kind of a big deal. A lot of publishers, are chasing me to try to get their books considered, and there's, different people that I'm trying to set up and coordinate. And, every time I have to kind of play secretary to the Ning on coordinating people's schedules and their publishers and whatnot, then that's time, then that's time away from, my kids or teaching or writing or anything else. So I would agree with you on those features in general. If you go back to the main page, there's something today that I think that I did just a little bit ago that I think is a really interesting example. If you scroll down a little bit, so there's this new report that came out today by Sandra Stotsky about literature. Scroll down just a little bit more, sorry, Steve. So Sandra Stotsky came out with a report today. It's right there, the Stotsky study of high school literature, and this is a big study. And I think one of the things that is, to me, this represents some of the best of the Ning, where people like myself who are attached to different things going on. I was interviewed by Education Week today about this for a while. So to bring that into the Ning and create links to it and invite them to have the conversation about a report that is important, regardless of whether you agree with it. To me, that goes back to that kind of that founding idea of trying to bring into the conversation, particularly for the newer teachers that wouldn't know about these sorts of things. And to invite that conversation. I think Carol Jago, who of course probably gets 25 reports a day thrown at her because she's involved in so many things, often will link to those sorts of things for us and try to enrich the conversation through those. So it's, to me, in this way, it brings people to the conversation and gives them a chance to share their thoughts. But it also ties into the three kind of larger goals for the Ning, which is to support all the teachers personally and professionally, to improve their practice and to grow the next generation of leaders. So, to the extent that a younger teacher like Meredith Stewart, who's here with us today, I think is part of the Ning and gets exposed to things through this and other stuff that she's doing, and then she starts writing for journals and presenting at conferences. I'm not saying she did that because of the Ning, but it's it's part of the overall professional climate for those younger teachers. Hi, Meredith.
Hi, Meredith. So, Jim, as your network's grown, in 22,000 is a lot of people. Classroom 2.0 is about to hit 50,000. And since both of the networks started, there's been a change in the number of places where you can go to interact. How do you think the fact that the networks are growing to that size and people can interact in many different places has an impact on, say, where you're going to go with English Companion Ning? I mean, has it changed the nature of how people use the network, and are you thinking about how you may need to change the network to accommodate sort of the size and diversity of options?
It's a good question. There are a couple sort of crossroads moments that have come up. One is that we've had a much larger number of I would say upper elementary, like 3 to 5 grade, 3 to 5 fifth grade teachers join, which is wonderful, and they can create their own discussions. Obviously, since I'm a high school teacher, it started out somewhat in that more at that level. The people, like Mike Umphrey that I saw join very early on and who really took up residence and were very much a part of the conversation, are still there, and they seem to be as active as they ever were. Interesting comparison maybe is that I live in San Francisco, and when I first moved to San Francisco, I'd never lived in a at the time what felt like a big city. But I think what I've come to realize over time is that in a big city you have like I live in the Richmond district, and that even within the Richmond district, which is kind of out by the Golden Gate Bridge, you have smaller neighborhoods within that. And so I think people kind of learn to find the parts that interest them. And then I think you've seen a change, which I've tried to actively work to guide, but I think it's tough. You've seen a change, I think, in the sense that people, instead of searching and going into groups and posting into groups, people are more defaulting to posting queries in the forum area. And what's, on the one hand, what's bad about that is you end up with a lot of duplication and clutter, because then people, will post and they'll say, does anybody have any ideas about Frankenstein? Early on, people would kind of go on and say, there's a whole group, in the teaching text section with Frankenstein materials. But I think as time's gone on, people don't kind of do that nudging. I struggle to do it myself. So, you kind of get this, that's kind of coming through again. But I've also learned, maybe a little bit like a kind of a compost metaphor. I think I've also learned to realize that it's not bad, that those things kind of come back up, that people, generate new ideas, and so that it's, kind of aerates the system.
So I think the Department of Ed went out to tender on the creation of kind of national networks for educators. If a network were millions of teachers, is it going to have the same impact that English Companion has had, or do you think that there needs to be this sort of ability to organize locally and small?
I'll answer maybe a slightly different question than you're asking, but it's definitely related. I was down in Birmingham, Alabama, at the State English Teachers Conference a couple weeks ago, and I was talking with a guy who had been meeting with the Alabama State Department of Education, and there's a lot of conversation about digital textbooks, and electronic textbooks and all that kind of stuff, and all the cost of the textbook industry. And there was very real conversation, maybe this is related to what you're asking, about creating essentially a national, sort of a compendium or something like kind of a national database of resources to which teachers, curriculum specialists, et cetera, could contribute, that would all be aligned with or have to be kind of connected with the Common Core standards. I have to admit, in full disclosure, I work for Holt McDougall for their textbook, but, I think about the chaos of something like that, of going in and searching for vocabulary strategies or handouts for those sorts of textbooks with, based on tags and things like that, and then having to print it and run it off or, display it, on my projector. And there's so many ways in which it could go wrong. So I think there's a drift towards that larger, sort of national database. But right, and as Donald says, some states like Texas are, they're not adopting the core standards. But as the NING grows, the only thing right now that I know is that I'm completely committed to, I'm 48, so I see my relationship to it, running, let's just be generous and say for the next 40 years. I see it as a lifelong commitment. What additional features will come along to accommodate, different use, I think that really remains to be seen. I try to keep it pretty simple. because if it gets too cluttered, then I think it really becomes difficult to use, and then people just blow it off.
So give us a quick tour here. What's the Donate tab for?
The Donate tab came up when Ning started charging $600 a year, so like $50 a month, and I'd always paid for the whole thing myself. But when it went, and I didn't mind that, but when it went to $600 for the year, I'm completely committed to it remaining free. But I felt like people needed to be able to have a way to be able to contribute to the maintenance of it. And as we started looking into professional development and things like that, the possibility of costs arise. So I'd like to say that I have this big giant bucket of like tens of thousands of dollars that we could just do anything we want. But the truth is, like after hitting the $500 mark, we're left with about $200 in our kitty, which is fine. But it just covers our expenses. I think people appreciate being able to do what they can to help out. The Amazon box was an alternative for those people who don't have a PayPal account and don't want to work through that. So just the idea of kind of working with us all to help pay for it.
So I don't use an active Amazon box, but when I put books up, especially for the interview series, I do put a link that goes into an account. I probably end up getting $30, $40 a month from that, which surprised me. I didn't expect. That seemed to me to be a lot.
Yeah, I don't even pay that much attention actually to what comes in from it. But also, it's it just kind of all feeds into one account. But that's the Donate piece. The My Page piece is just kind of my one space for me to put stuff. So I look a lot like Steve, as you'll see from My Page there. Curriculum was an early attempt to try to link to some specific groups for ease of navigation. I think if you went back to your concerns about its limits, Steve, I think navigation is always kind of a tricky one. The search function is one. I've added that other Google search box, but search remains, I think, pretty weak. So most of the tabs are just there to kind of improve navigation. Under community, to be able to kind of jump straight around. The teacher jobs and EdJoin, I haven't actually gone to those for a long time, but the idea was to create a space for the possibility of kind of this as a place to come to for information about jobs. And I could pay to have a feed in a different way, and it would be much more impressive, but I don't think we need to do that. So that's community. Multimedia is just kind of the basic pieces. We have been trying with the PD to create more dedicated channels. This idea with SlideShare and YouTube to create specific channels. So when we have PD events or people, kind of want to be encouraged to post slides, then that kind of goes into that. Applications, I think, is mostly chat, and then the e-signing digest. And chat, I don't know about your experience. Chat has never really taken off. I'm not a big chat fan. I like to, kind of be on what I want to be on. Notes and events is pretty important. That's where you link to the book clubs and the webstitutes and the calendars. The FAQs was a really useful thing early on, and the Ning guidelines. I think the extent to which people can have some of those questions answered. The EC Ning guidelines primarily say that you can't sell anything here, and that's, I think, the commercial aspect of the community early on was just a huge decision. I think people say things like they feel safe, and kind of protected from trying to be promoted or sold or approached in any way, and that's something that people are very quick to tell me. Somebody's trying to sell me something, and I will sort that out. So the community guidelines have been really helpful. And then under the the members, that's pretty straight, I think. And then the book clubs, it doesn't, I think it only goes till 10, but you look at the list of people there that have been involved in sharing their ideas with us. It's just a wonderful group of people who come in and run those discussions. So who wouldn't want to look at those 100 people? They got to hang out with Carol Jago for about 2 weeks and have a great discussion with Carol, who for my money is going to lead as good a book discussion as anybody's ever going to lead for you.
So in your menuing there, what you've done is you've taken a variety of the internal capabilities of Ning and some external sites, and you've just tried to build a menuing structure that gave people some variety and places to go from that top menu.
That, but also just to try to kind of improve the efficiency. The navigation of the place. I think when you the extent to which you can move around a little more quickly and find the places that you want. I think that's useful. I'll go in and clean out my little note about our discussion here today. The Twitter feed I think is useful. Other stuff shows up in there. It kind of cycles through, and again, that's I think it's useful. I don't know if anybody else read. I'm sure Carol did because Carol turned me on to the New Yorker a million years ago. But Malcolm Gladwell's piece, which you can read online on social networking, was really fascinating. It was primarily kind of about Twitter, but I really recommend everybody going on to NewYorker.com and reading that most recent Malcolm Gladwell piece from the October 4th issue, because he talked about, in large part, whether or not the civil rights movement could have happened through a social network like Twitter. And his quick answer is that it was something very different, that people had to put themselves on the line, and that when you hear these discussions about, the Twitter revolution, Meredith, you're so fast. When you hear these things about the Twitter revolution in Iran, his point is that 70% of the people who were tweeting were outside of Iran, and that it was something that they could easily do from their kitchen table, but they didn't have to put anything on the line. Whereas when I was at the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum a couple weekends ago, looking at the images of the civil rights movement, you just get this profound sense of what people had to put on the table there.
Let me. I'm a little bit informed on this from having read a Clay Shirky response, but I think it was interesting to me because here you've built a network with 22,000 people. There are definitely weak ties, but don't some strong ties come out of this? And so isn't there room for there both being sort of this expansive audience that maybe is not as committed, but doesn't it also open the door to smaller groups that can, from within this network, gather together and do things of significance?
Oh yeah, I mean, as Carol Jago just posted there, it's not either or. I mean, I think it's interesting to wonder whether the civil rights movement would have used Twitter, and my sense is that they wouldn't, because of course that would have alerted the white establishment to, you don't tweet out, everybody meet, over at the 16th Street Baptist Church, don't tell the white people, on a social network. It doesn't quite work that way. So it is different, and I completely accept the validity of both. Obviously, it's worth mentioning. See that before I ever did this, I had this one little background in running networks, which is a little more political, and it was called KateNet. And I don't know, Carol can maybe tell me what year the whole class test debacle was, but the state test in California came under attack for censorship, and it was developed largely by the Writing Project. And it was a long time ago, as Carol says, and I first heard word about it, and this is when I had like my first AOL address, and so I just took sort of the 8 email addresses that I had and posted out this note asking people whether or not they were being censored in their sites, and by the time I stepped down from KateNet a year ago, after kind of having to trade over to the Ning more full time, there were about 12,000 people on CapeNet. So, you know, I'm a very big believer in the political power of those networks. That was the fundamental basis for CapeNet. But it was just a listserv, just an email, kind of moderated listserv that, you know, all got filtered through me. And so that was a very different kind of network.
You know, we moved right past the normal time for Q&A, so I'm just going to ask if anybody wants to ask Jim a question, please feel free to raise your hand using the hand with the green up arrow, or post your question in the chat. And if you posted a question that we've missed, please post it again because it's easy to have it go by. Jim, so I'm wondering, has professional development been sort of a sweet spot for social networking and education? And does it help us to understand how it might be used for student work? And have you seen some good examples of student use of social networking?
I think a lot of schools that I go to are they're having a tough time dealing with the social network question, you know, because of the anxiety. So I'll go to places where the kids have a one student, one laptop program, and they're not able to, you know, access any of that kind of stuff and make use of it. I think that I don't, to be honest, spend a lot of time in active online sorts of stuff outside of the Ning. I think that the mix of PD, as far as kind of a PD event that people created on the Ning last summer was really interesting, because it was a blend of live keynotes through Illuminate, people making videos that they posted which weren't live, but then they were there live to respond to and lead a discussion from that. I think that the ability to just use the Ning itself as a professional development context to come in and look for information or simply post a query about things that people want to learn more about is profound. I mean, the idea. Well, let me just put it this way. When I was a new teacher in 1989, I said, "What do I do? And what do I teach?" And Doug Rogers, my wonderful department chair, handed me a sheet of paper with 10 titles on it and said, "This is what you do this year." And I was a brand new teacher, and just completely on my own for the most part in a wonderful department. The idea of being able to come to the Ning right now as a new teacher or a teacher teaching a new class and say, "Man, I have no idea where to start. Where do I go?" And the response of people to some of those people, particularly in crisis, is never really quite ceases to amaze me on the Ning. People will always help those teachers that post sort of urgent calls for help.
So Carol made a point here about calling it professional life more than, thinking of it as professional life more than professional development. So we'll use Carol's phrase there. Is there a lesson here from the professional life of educators where the social network allows them to sort of very proactively create their own professional life and fulfillment opportunities? And now we're seeing regular educators begin to create conferences and their own larger activities and want to be a part of the dialogue on educational policy. Is there a parallel with, are we going to see a similar transformation with students where they're going to be more likely enabled to take responsibility for their own education and seek out the things they're interested in working on?
I think that is more likely to happen. My sense would be in sort of with this, as I was saying earlier, with this, as the Gen Ys, the millennials move further into the field and they're just so comfortable with all that. I think that it'll like the kind of the clutter and the learning will kind of be out of the way. I would have to learn how to do some of those things and enough that it might serve as an obstacle to me in some way. The piece that the other side of what you're asking, Steve, that I think is very messy and complicated and has been a touchy subject is the relationship between something like the Ning and professional organizations. because they have overhead. They have brick and mortar places, and they have a huge whole conventions to put on. And as you start to look at the budget cutbacks across the country, and the inability of districts to send teachers and department chairs and administrators to things like AXA or NCTE or the math teachers organization, the question of sustainability for large professional organizations is really a complicated question. I owe so much of my professional life and my professional wisdom to NCTE, so I have times where I feel very conflicted about the extent to which we kind of can bump up against each other a little bit, and sometimes I feel a little bit like like the blogger that's putting stuff out there for free and causing trouble for the newspapers, even though that was never my intention. So I think you see professional development coming online in bigger and better ways all the time, sometimes for economic reasons, sometimes for personal choice reasons of teachers who can't go to the conferences, or they could but they can stay home and get a lot of learning for free and be with their family instead. So it's a really big transitional phase in some of that stuff, and I think the role of the professional organizations is a really rich opportunity for them, but they've got to figure out how to play that.
Fascinating, Jim. I'm reminded of my background experience with open source software, which tends to replace software at certain levels but doesn't replace others, and I think maybe it's not a bad way of looking at how change takes place. There will be some things that get replaced and others that can't be. Okay, I really want to thank you for coming on tonight. Really appreciate your being here. We've reached the top of the hour, and as always, much faster than I would have wanted us to. Thanks to Illuminate, Bing, and now Blackboard. And coming up tomorrow, please don't miss Diane Ravitch if you're interested, or any of the future of education events. Jim, any parting words?
I have to tell you, I look at that list of people that you invited me to be listed amongst, and I just completely feel humbled to be invited to be part of such a conversation. I loved Diane Ravitch's latest book, Philip Schlechty's stuff. Has been great. Will Richardson is just a warrior. It's an amazing list to be there. And so on behalf of all the people on the Ning that have made it worth being invited onto this list, we all thank you for giving credit and recognition for our work, because the Ning is, at the end of the day, belongs to all of us, not to me. So thanks so much, Steve.
Well, you're very generous, and thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Sure appreciate it. The recording will be posted later tonight or tomorrow. Do appreciate your participating. And Jim, great to meet you and spend some time with you. You've done a terrific thing, you and your community. Take care, everybody, and have a great night.
See you on the Ning.